Monday mornings never came easy for anyone. But for me, Brianna Carter, they carried the weight of a storm I could feel in my bones. The city outside my apartment window glittered like a promise. But promises in Midtown were tricky. You had to chase them, negotiate with them, sometimes fight for them. And today, I wasn't just chasing, I was ready to confront. Coffee in hand, I moved toward the reflective glass of my apartment door, heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Each tap was a heartbeat, but not the kind that comforted me. No, this was the rhythm of anticipation, anxiety, and the thrill of a plan coming together. I slid into my black blazer, adjusted my gold hoop earrings, the ones that my mom swore made me look like I owned every room I walked into, and I breathed. Deep, in, out, focus, the kind of focus that doesn't quiver in boardrooms, that doesn't flinch when emails scream injustice at you from a glowing screen. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. Reflections of me danced against the mirrored walls, my eyes scanning every contour of my face, questioning if I was ready. I was, more than ready. The day ahead was a battlefield, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had a real weapon in my hands. Not a gun, not a threat, but evidence, documents, emails, screenshots, a paper trail that, if presented right, would expose more than just incompetence. It would expose the corruption that had festered in Redwood Global for years. As the elevator dinged, I stepped out into the lobby, polished marble under my stilettos, the hum of the city sneaking in through the glass walls. People passed, faces blurred, some nodding politely, some too absorbed in their own climb to notice a woman walking with a mission. I caught a glimpse of Mariah, my colleague, a snake wrapped in Prada. Her smile was sharp, like she knew something I didn't yet, but she didn't know everything. Not today, not anymore. I passed the security desk without a word, my badge swiping with a satisfying beep. I was inside. My office towered above Midtown like a fortress. And inside it, the game of politics, power, and betrayal played out daily. But I wasn't here to play anymore. I was here to rewrite the rules. My desk looked normal, nothing that would hint at the revolution I was about to start. But under the sleek surface, folders lay stacked neatly, labeled in ways that only I could decode. Redwood emails, evidence, performance discrepancies 2025, board meeting notes, uncut. Each one was a brick in the wall I was about to build around the truth. And then came the emails. My inbox pinged, a trivial thing for most, but each alert felt like a drumbeat leading me to war. Messages from Redwood's office, from our, even the occasional passive-aggressive note from Mariah. I ignored them all, focused on the one message that mattered, the one with the attachment that could change the course of my career. And possibly, their empire. I double-clicked, the files opened, and I let out a slow breath. Bingo! For months, I had watched them, Redwood, the CEO who thrived on intimidation, and his clique of polished executives, trample over good employees, siphon ideas, and dodge accountability, and I had done nothing. Silent, invisible, strategic, but silent no longer. Today, I had leverage, and leverage in my hands was power. I leaned back in my chair, eyes scanning the documents. Each sentence, each email, each memo was a thread, and when I pulled one, the entire tapestry of deception would unravel. The thrill of control rushed through me. It was intoxicating, but with it came nerves, too. This wasn't just office politics, it was my life, my reputation, my career. One misstep, and the story could flip. But one right move could ignite a change so profound. It would ripple through the corridors of power like fire through dry brush. A knock at my office door jolted me from my thoughts. "Brianna, you got a minute?" Mariah's voice, saccharine sweet, almost mocking. I smiled politely, inviting her in. Her heels clicked against the floor, echoing like the soundtrack to every catfight I'd endured silently. She leaned casually against the edge of my desk, a smirk playing on her lips. "Big plans today, huh? Monday energy?" I met her gaze evenly. "Always," I said, the calm in my voice belying the storm inside. She tilted her head, studying me as if trying to decode my thoughts. But today, Brianna Carter wasn't readable. I had armor, mental armor, forged from months of preparation. Sleepless nights, whispered conversations with mentors, and the bitter taste of being underestimated. Mariah's phone buzzed, and she checked it quickly. Eyes widened, just slightly, and I knew she'd seen the same thread of opportunity I had. The shift in power was coming, whether she liked it or not, and I didn't just want to survive it, I wanted to dominate it. By the time the morning briefing started, my plan had crystallized. Every word I would speak, every question I would ask, every glance I would give, it was choreographed like a dance. Precise, calculated, unapologetic. I was no longer just an employee navigating a maze of glass cubicles and hollow promises. I was the spark, the catalyst, and in a room full of polished smiles and hushed gossip, Brianna Carter was about to make them notice. The boardroom was alive with the usual chaos, murmured conversations, laptops clicking, coffee cups clinking. Redwood entered, aura of arrogance in every step. He didn't see me, not yet. He had never truly seen me. Not the way he should have. Not the way everyone else eventually would. As he began speaking, outlining goals, quotas, and visionary initiatives, I sat back, listening, memorizing, observing the cracks behind the polished veneer, the slips, the arrogance, the tiny betrayals hidden in tone and gesture. And when the right moment came, when the room's attention shifted just slightly, I would strike, not with noise, not with anger, but with the quiet precision of someone who had waited for this moment for too long. Outside the windows, the city blazed in gold and steel, oblivious to the drama unfolding within these walls. Inside, I felt it, pulse rising, palms steady, heart hammering. Today was Monday. Today, Brianna Carter would stop being underestimated. Today, the game changed. And for those who doubted her, who thought a young black woman in heels and gold hoops would remain invisible in a sea of privilege and power, they were about to learn. Because in the world of Redwood Global, visibility was everything, and I intended to make myself impossible to ignore. The boardroom doors were massive, polished mahogany with steel handles that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. I pushed them open and stepped inside, heels tapping like a metronome, each step a countdown to the storm I was about to unleash. The room smelled of espresso, polished leather, and power, three things that didn't intimidate me anymore. Not today. Redwood was already at the head of the table, his posture rigid, jaw set, eyes scanning the room as if he could see into the very souls of everyone present. He hadn't noticed me yet. He never did, at least not truly, not the way a woman like me, a black woman, could observe him and read every flicker of arrogance, every twitch of impatience. I walked past the rows of polished executives, their nods polite, their eyes subtly cautious. Some of them knew what was coming, some didn't. "Morning, Brianna," Mariah said, leaning just enough into the room to let her presence land like a shadow. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were sharp. She knew, she always knew. I smiled, a slow, measured smile. "Morning," I replied. The calm in my voice masked the fire inside. Redwood finally looked up. His eyes scanned me, briefly, dismissively. "Ah, Carter, glad you could join us," he said, voice smooth like oil over glass. Smooth, polished, but not strong. "Not today, not against me." I took my seat strategically, directly across from him, positioning myself where every eye in the room could see me without a single hint of intimidation in my posture. I had rehearsed this moment for weeks, visualizing every angle, every glance, every word. The meeting began with the usual litany of numbers, charts, and performance metrics. The executives nodded, murmured agreements, and occasionally scribbled notes. I sat quietly, scanning every face, every flicker of reaction, and then, the first misstep. Redwood spoke about last quarter's team achievements, casually mentioning projects I had led, taking credit with a smirk that made my blood boil. The room nodded along as if hypnotized, but I wasn't. I leaned forward, slow, deliberate, and raised my hand. "Excuse me, Redwood," I said, my voice steady but firm. "When you mention team achievements, are you including the emails I sent outlining the strategy for Project Aurora?" A few heads turned, executives exchanging subtle glances. Redwood's smirk faltered, just for a fraction of a second. Of course, Carter. The team, your team, did exceptional work, he said, trying to regain composure. I didn't flinch. Actually, sir, I continued, producing my tablet and swiping to the evidence folder. I want to make sure the board sees the timeline and communications that prove leadership and initiative came from me directly. The air shifted. You could almost hear it, a subtle electricity. The kind that makes polished executives shift in leather chairs. The kind that makes your stomach tighten with both fear and exhilaration. I could see it in Redwood's eyes. Surprise, a hint of panic, but not just that, underlying it, the faint tremor of being exposed. Mariah's eyes widened slightly, the shadow of admiration flickering across her expression. Quickly masked with caution, she had underestimated me before, and now she was realizing the gravity of what I was about to do. I tapped the tablet, casting a spreadsheet across the conference room's large screen. Emails, timelines, performance charts. Everything was meticulously organized, impossible to dismiss. Each slide was a hammer hitting the polished steel of the boardroom hierarchy. This, I said, gesturing toward the screen, is not a matter of opinion or interpretation. This is documented evidence. Evidence of leadership, accountability, and initiative. Evidence that has, until now, been ignored or appropriated without credit. And while I've been patient, waiting for acknowledgement, the time for subtlety is over. A hush fell over the room. Even the usual chatter of executives trying to assert dominance stilled. Redwood cleared his throat, a slight quiver betraying his usual composure. Brianna, this is surprising, he said, voice tight. Perhaps we can discuss this after the meeting. I shook my head. No, this is the meeting. I turned the screen to show a sequence of emails where Redwood himself took credit for ideas that weren't his, followed by internal memos where my suggestions were buried or ignored. This isn't personal, I said, leaning forward so my eyes met his. This is accountability, and if leadership can't accept accountability, then the board deserves to know. I could feel the energy shift further. Some executives began exchanging quick whispers, eyes darting toward Redwood, a few nods toward me. The subtle acknowledgement that someone was finally speaking truth. Redwood's face hardened. Carter, you're crossing a line, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. There was no real control there anymore. Not against me. I smiled, calm, collected. The line was crossed long before today. Sir, I'm just drawing attention to it. Then came the quietest, most powerful moment. The board chair, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and piercing eyes, leaned back and finally spoke. Ms. Carter, if what you're presenting is accurate, then we need to address this immediately. No one should be denied recognition or have their contributions appropriated. It's unacceptable. The room murmured agreement. Redwood shifted in his seat, visibly unsettled, and for the first time, the illusion of untouchable authority cracked. Mariah leaned subtly toward me, whispered just enough for me to hear. You've changed the game. I nodded slightly. No words, no celebration, not yet. The real work, the systemic reform, the reshaping of perception, the reclaiming of power, had only begun. Today was the first move in a long chess game. But the first move mattered. The first strike mattered, and I had landed it perfectly. When the meeting concluded, Redwood exited with a stiff nod. His usual confidence diminished. I gathered my tablet, feeling the surge of energy that only comes from standing firmly, unapologetically, and forcing truth into a room built on illusion. As I walked back to my office, colleagues subtly nodded. Some whispered congratulations, some cautious admiration. I let it wash over me, quiet, potent, victorious. But Brianna Carter never celebrated alone. Not yet. There was more to do. Because in the corporate jungle of Redwood Global, survival wasn't enough. Dominance required strategy, patience, and courage, and I had all three. The city outside shimmered with gold light through the massive windows. It didn't know what had happened inside. It didn't need to. The story was just beginning. And Brianna Carter? She was finally visible, finally undeniable, and the game had irrevocably changed. The office was quieter than usual the next morning. Not the calm of productivity, but the kind of quiet that stretches across a room after a storm has passed, leaving everyone tense, unsettled, waiting for the next lightning strike. I walked in, coffee in hand, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. But each step felt heavier than usual, because now the storm was mine to command. I passed the receptionist, who gave me a glance that was a mix of curiosity and awe. Whispers floated in the hallways like ghosts. I could hear fragments. "Did you see the board meeting? Brianna just exposed him. Redwood's face, never seen him like that." I didn't flinch. I couldn't. I was still processing the shift myself, the exhilarating surge of control, tempered with the understanding that corporate battles were never won in a single day. When I reached my office, I set my coffee down and opened my laptop. The first email in my inbox was from Mariah. Subject: "We need to talk." I paused. Mariah, my rival, my ally in disguise. I hesitated only a moment before opening it. "Brianna, you made waves yesterday. Impressive, but waves can sink ships if not navigated carefully. Meet me in the conference lounge at 11. No exclamation points. No emojis. Cold, professional, dangerous. I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Mariah wasn't congratulating me. She wasn't scared, at least not enough to admit it. She was calculating, watching, planning. The wheels in her mind were turning as fast as mine. And that was perfect. Perfect for me, for what I intended to do next. The hours until 11 dragged. I kept busy, reviewing data, preparing presentations, planning my next moves, but the tension was inescapable. Every glance, every nod from colleagues, every hushed whisper felt amplified. Finally, I left my office, my heels echoing down the hall, walking toward the conference lounge. Mariah was already there, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a sly smirk tugging at her lips. "Brianna," she said, voice smooth, casual, but sharp as a scalpel. "Quite a performance yesterday. I didn't think you had it in you." I raised an eyebrow, stepping closer. "Performance?" I echoed, voice calm, deliberate, exposing truth. "Mariah, I call it truth. Seems like the board calls it impressive." She smirked again. "Truth, or recklessness, depends on who's defining it." I leaned on the table between us, my posture relaxed but controlled. "Maybe, but sometimes recklessness is the only way to break through years of silence. Years of being overlooked, underestimated, ignored." She studied me, her eyes sharp, calculating, and for the first time, just for a heartbeat, I saw a flicker of respect, or at least recognition. "You know," she said slowly, "we could be useful to each other." I froze. Useful? My mind raced. Mariah, my competitor in the office hierarchy, my rival in every political maneuver I'd survived, was suggesting an alliance? "You're proposing a partnership?" I asked carefully. "Not exactly partnership," she replied. "Call it strategic alignment. For the right causes, for the right battles." I waited in silence. I didn't trust her, not fully, but pragmatism in the corporate jungle required flexibility. And yesterday, I had proven that I was no longer someone to ignore. Perhaps aligning with Mariah, even temporarily, could amplify my influence. "Fine," I said finally, meeting her gaze, "but make no mistake, I don't play second fiddle. Not to anyone, and if you betray me." She raised her hands slightly, a subtle gesture of truce. "I wouldn't dream of it. Not yet." We had an unspoken understanding. A delicate, tense alliance, both of us predators, circling the same territory, acknowledging the power each held. The fallout from yesterday rippled through Redwood Global like an aftershock. Redwood himself was quieter, more contained, his usual smug dominance replaced by sharp, clipped communication. I caught glimpses of him in the hallways, eyes flicking to me. Calculating, wary, the man who had once felt untouchable now treated me with the careful scrutiny of someone realizing a storm is brewing. And he might be caught in it. Emails poured in. Messages from colleagues expressing discreet congratulations. Others requesting meetings under the guise of normal business. But really, seeking guidance. For the first time, I felt the subtle shift of influence. The gravitational pull of leadership forming around me. Not from my title, not from my office, but from respect, and sometimes fear. Yet, the higher I climbed, the more dangerous the currents became. I could see it in Redwood's eyes, in Mariah's carefully measured demeanor, in whispers that floated down the halls like smoke. Allies could turn into rivals in an instant. And I had learned the hardest lesson early. Trust was a currency more volatile than money. I retreated to my office late that evening. Finally alone. The city lights stretched across the skyline, glittering like distant stars, indifferent to the battles fought below. I sat in the quiet, letting the adrenaline ebb, reflecting on the path ahead. Part of me wanted to celebrate, to allow the rush of victory to wash over me. But Brianna Carter never celebrated early. Not in this world, not when ambition, power, and injustice danced together in the halls above polished marble floors. I opened my notebook, scribbling notes and strategies, every move, every counter, every potential ally and enemy catalogued meticulously. The boardroom had been a victory. Yes, but the war? That was just beginning. I paused, hand hovering over the pen. In that pause, I felt it, the weight of responsibility. Not just to myself, but to every black woman in every office like mine. Every overlooked talent waiting for acknowledgement. Every ignored voice waiting for someone brave enough to speak. That thought hardened me, sharpened me. The fire inside, once simmering, now roared. Tomorrow, I would strike again, carefully, calculated, unstoppable. Because power, I realized, was not given, it was claimed. And Brianna Carter? She was just getting started. The office felt heavier that morning. Like the air itself carried the weight of anticipation. Even the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed sharper, casting long, precise shadows across the marble floors. Every step I took echoed louder than usual, and I couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in dynamics. Colleagues avoided my gaze, some with curiosity, others with cautious respect, all aware that something fundamental had changed yesterday. I had made waves, and now the ripples were colliding in unpredictable ways. Redwood's office door remained closed longer than usual, a fortress of glass and steel. I imagined him pacing inside, calculating, measuring, scheming. The man who had once exuded unshakable dominance now operated in the kind of quiet rage that could explode without warning. I welcomed it. I settled at my desk and opened my laptop. Emails from various departments awaited, some with veiled congratulations, some requesting insights, and a few that were unmistakably testing the waters. A single glance at my screen, and I could sense who was aligned, who was still loyal to Redwood, and who was silently biding their time. Then came a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration in my inbox, a message from an anonymous sender. Subject line: watch your back. I paused, hand hovering over the mouse. My heartbeat ticked audibly in my ears. This was no longer just a battle of strategy. It had escalated into outright warfare. Whoever had sent this wanted me uneasy. They wanted me to question every step, every move, every ally. But Brianna Carter did not cower. Not now, not ever. I pressed reply. I'm already aware. Thanks for the warning. No name, no acknowledgement. The silence that followed was satisfying. A reminder that I controlled my response, even when unseen forces tried to intimidate me. Hours later, Redwood finally emerged, visibly composed but with a subtle tension in his shoulders that didn't go unnoticed. He called a surprise all-hands meeting, the kind designed to remind everyone who still held power, or at least, who wanted them to believe it. The boardroom filled quickly, colleagues whispering, glancing at me with a mixture of admiration and anxiety. Redwood began, voice calm but edged with a controlled menace. Yesterday was disruptive. I won't deny it, but disruption does not equal progress. Let's remember who built this company, who maintains its operations, and who determines its direction. Every word was carefully weighted, a performance of strength masking the panic I knew simmered beneath. I sat, quiet, letting him speak while calculating my next move. Redwood had underestimated me once. That mistake wouldn't repeat. After the meeting, whispers started, silent communications, fleeting glances, emails disguised as mundane updates, all pointing to a brewing retaliation. Redwood had deployed subtle sabotage, budget restrictions, reassignment of key projects, and delays in approvals. He was testing boundaries, trying to destabilize me, and I felt the thrill of the game ignite. I retreated to my office, closing the door softly behind me. My mind raced. Redwood's moves were aggressive but predictable to someone who had studied the dance of corporate politics for years. I opened my notebook, my fingers moving quickly over the paper as I outlined countermeasures. Each sabotage, each delay, each subtle slight could be turned into leverage, an opportunity to demonstrate both skill and control. Then came Mariah's text. "Meet me tonight. 7 p.m. Rooftop. Urgent." A flicker of anticipation sparked inside me. She had been watching, assessing, and now she wanted to coordinate. Strategic alignment meant mutual advantage, but trust was a luxury in this world. And I had learned early that caution was a weapon as sharp as intellect. By 7 p.m., I was on the rooftop, the city skyline stretching in every direction, a maze of lights and shadows. Mariah was already there, her silhouette poised against the night. "You saw the moves," she said, her voice low but deliberate. "Redwood's retaliating. Subtle, yes, but effective if unchecked." I nodded. "I've catalogued everything. His weaknesses, his predictable patterns, and his ego. He won't see the counter coming until it's too late." She smiled, a thin, knowing curve of her lips. "Exactly. That's why we need to act carefully, but decisively. Timing is everything. And the people around him? They're starting to watch me more than him. They'll watch you too. We need to control the narrative." A shiver ran down my spine, not from fear, but from exhilaration. The game was on, and Brianna Carter? She was no longer a player, she was a strategist. A conductor, orchestrating moves in a symphony of corporate warfare. Over the next few days, I executed subtle but deliberate countermoves. Budgets were reallocated strategically, projects reprioritized, allies engaged discreetly, and Redwood's attempts at obstruction were met with precision timing and undeniable results. Every small victory was a carefully placed chess piece, building momentum, building perception, building inevitability. One afternoon, I received a whisper of information. Redwood had been planning a major departmental shake-up. One that could have pushed me to the sidelines entirely. I smiled privately, savoring the opportunity. I already had the blueprint to turn his shake-up into my advantage. Timing, presentation, and a little psychological pressure, enough to make him doubt himself while colleagues saw my competence shine. The tension in the office was palpable. Electric. Colleagues now walked the line carefully, aware that the tides of power had shifted. I could feel the respect in the air, silent but unmistakable, coupled with a flicker of fear. Late that night, alone in my office, I allowed myself a rare smile. This was what victory felt like, not loud, not celebrated, but deep, resonant, satisfying in its quiet, inevitable way. The retaliation had begun, yes, but I had transformed it into an arena of opportunity. Every threat, every obstacle, every subtle attack was now a chance to assert control, to demonstrate intellect, to build influence. I leaned back, eyes on the city lights, reflecting on the journey so far. The stakes had risen. Redwood had shown his hand. Mariah had offered a tentative alliance. And I, Brianna Carter, had turned a moment of exposure into a platform of power, strategy, and undeniable presence. Tomorrow, the war would continue. But tonight, I relished in the mastery of maneuvering through chaos. The thrill of the silent, strategic victory. I had learned that in corporate warfare, it wasn't just about strength or loud confrontation. It was about vision, patience, and knowing exactly when to strike. Because in this game, Brianna Carter was no longer just surviving. She was commanding, and anyone who doubted her would soon learn the consequences. Monday arrived with a subtle, dangerous quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes chaos. I could feel it the moment I stepped into Blackstone Dynamics' Midtown Tower, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each sound a measured reminder that I was no longer just walking into an office. I was walking into the battlefield I had meticulously prepared. Redwood had spent the weekend plotting. That much was obvious. Security cameras caught his prolonged presence in the office. The way his tie was always slightly askew, betraying inner turmoil he didn't dare voice. But he had underestimated one thing. Brianna Carter didn't play by the rules that had confined others. I had watched, waited, catalogued, and learned. His arrogance, his pride, his need to control, it was all laid bare for me to exploit. I passed by colleagues on my way to the boardroom. Subtle glances, hushed whispers. Some offered silent nods of encouragement. Others were cautious, calculating. Every one of them was a variable. And I was the constant in the equation. The all-hands meeting was called for 10 a.m., but I arrived early. As always, allowing myself to observe the room emptying and filling in waves. The air was thick, heavy with anticipation. And then, I saw him, Redwood, standing near the head of the table. Perfectly composed, or so it appeared. His eyes flickered in a way that betrayed the smallest hint of unease. A tiny crack in the armor. As the room filled, I could feel the energy shifting. I claimed my seat near the center. Laptop open, posture deliberate. Redwood's opening statement was predictably smooth. Good morning, everyone. As you know, we've had disruptions recently. But it's important we stay focused on our objectives, our values, and the integrity of our operations. Integrity, his favorite word. I allowed a small smile to form at the corner of my mouth. My turn was coming, and I was ready to expose the cracks in that so-called integrity. The meeting progressed, slides, charts, budget forecasts, but I had planted subtle pieces of evidence in advance. Emails, project timelines, mismanaged budgets, all leading to a chain of accountability that none could ignore. And when the moment was right, I leaned forward, clicking the remote to my presentation. The room dimmed, the screen illuminated, and the narrative shifted. Let's take a look at the recent allocation of the Innovation Fund. I began, voice calm, unwavering. I noticed several discrepancies that I believe warrant further review. Eyes turned to me. A hush fell. Redwood's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he did not interrupt. One by one, I laid out documents, emails, and project files, carefully curated to highlight the mismanagement and favoritism that had quietly shaped the company under his watch. Each slide was precise, each fact undeniable, each question carefully positioned to expose not just errors, but the mindset behind them. Notice here, I continued, pointing to a chart, that Project A received increased funding despite consistent underperformance. Meanwhile, Project B, which met all key deliverables, was underfunded and delayed. The pattern repeats across multiple teams. I'm confident you'll agree this deserves scrutiny. Whispers began. Colleagues leaned closer to one another, sharing murmured reactions. I could feel the tension radiating from Redwood, his gaze flicking toward the door, toward anyone, anywhere, but never meeting mine. He had trained himself to command a room, but not like this. Not when the truth was laid bare so publicly, so methodically. A hand raised. One of the junior managers, someone who had hesitated before, now looked at me with a mixture of admiration and cautious resolve. Brianna, this is eye-opening. I didn't realize the extent. Exactly. The seeds of change were sprouting. And Redwood, realizing the power I had harnessed, began to lose the subtle control he had relied upon for so long. I continued, pacing lightly at the front of the room, eyes scanning every face. I'm not here to assign blame arbitrarily, I said, voice steady, commanding attention. I'm here to ensure accountability, transparency, and, most importantly, that the people of Blackstone Dynamics can trust the leadership to act with integrity. Redwood finally spoke, voice low, attempting to regain control. Brianna, I appreciate your diligence, but... I cut him off gently but firmly. No, Redwood, what I appreciate is the opportunity to present facts. Facts speak louder than opinions. And these facts demand action. The room was silent, every gaze on us both. Redwood's usual charisma was now overshadowed by the undeniable clarity of my presentation. Colleagues began exchanging glances, subtle nods, whispers that could no longer be ignored. My exposure had struck at the heart of perception, the delicate balance between fear, respect, and credibility. By the time I concluded, The room felt charged, transformed. I welcome further discussion. I finished, voice calm. And I encourage all of us to consider not only what we tolerate but what we empower. Accountability is not optional, it's essential. A moment of silence. And then, slowly, the murmurs began. Support, concern, recognition, all interwoven. Redwood's authority had not vanished. But it was questioned. Quietly, internally, I savored the subtle victory. I had exposed the cracks without overplaying aggression, maintained composure under scrutiny, and shifted the narrative in my favor. Later, I returned to my office. Letting the adrenaline subside, my reflection in the glass looked different tonight, stronger, more resolved. I knew this was only the beginning. Redwood would retaliate, escalate, attempt to regain dominance. But now, the battlefield had changed. The pieces were moving according to a plan I controlled. A message pinged on my laptop. Mariah. Well done. But this is only round 1. Keep your strategy tight. He'll strike where you least expect. I smiled. I'm ready. I typed back. Brianna Carter wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. A strategist who understood not just the mechanics of corporate warfare but the psychology behind it. Tonight, I would celebrate the quiet victories, the ones that whispered of power, control, and respect. Tomorrow, the game would escalate. But for now, Brianna Carter had exposed the Emperor's flaws. And the world would not soon forget it. The morning air outside Blackstone Dynamics felt different. Heavy, electric, loaded with the kind of tension that tightens the chest before a storm hits. I could feel the city pulse beneath my feet as I approached the Midtown Tower. Each step measured, deliberate. Today wasn't just another day in the office. Today was the reckoning. I had spent hours planning, rehearsing, aligning every piece of evidence, every witness, every subtle insinuation. This wasn't about personal vendetta. This was about justice, accountability, and the kind of integrity that Redwood had systematically dismantled. My phone buzzed. A text from Mariah. You're the storm. Don't let him see you hesitate. I smiled, fingers lingering over the screen before I tucked the phone away. Hesitation wasn't in my vocabulary. The boardroom was already buzzing when I arrived. Redwood stood at the head of the table, flanked by senior executives who shifted nervously as I walked past them. I could feel his eyes, the weight of his gaze like a spotlight pressing down on me. But I held my head high. Confidence isn't just a posture, it's armor. And today, I wore mine like a second skin. Brianna, Redwood said, voice deceptively calm. I hope you understand the gravity of your actions last week. His words were measured, but the underlying threat wasn't subtle. He believed fear could still manipulate me. He hadn't yet realized I thrived in confrontation. I took my seat deliberately across from him, opening my laptop with a smooth, controlled motion. The room quieted as colleagues turned to watch the tension unfold. I let the silence hang, thick and unrelenting. Before speaking, Redwood, today isn't about me. It's about the integrity of this company. And the people who make it what it is. Let's make sure that message is clear. I clicked the remote, dimming the room, illuminating the screen. Charts, emails, internal reports. Everything meticulously curated to expose not just Redwood's mismanagement, but his attempts to manipulate perception, control narratives, and silence dissent. Every click, every slide, every highlighted passage was a carefully placed step in the choreography of his exposure. He leaned forward, voice low, trying to assert dominance. Brianna, these accusations. I cut him off with calm precision. Not accusations. Redwood, evidence. Documented, verifiable, undeniable evidence. And today, the world isn't just watching us, they're watching you. Whispers began to ripple across the room. Executives shifted in their seats. Glances exchanged, some supportive, some wary. I could feel the subtle tremors of influence as the scales began to tip. Redwood's usual aura of control wavered. The first visible crack appeared in his polished facade. I paced slowly, deliberately, letting the room absorb every word. The problem isn't a single mistake. It's a pattern. It's a culture of fear and favoritism that undermines the talent, the creativity, and the dedication of the people who make this company thrive. And that pattern stops now. My voice was steady, resonant, carrying both authority and empathy, a combination that resonated deeply with my Black American colleagues, many of whom had quietly endured inequity under his leadership. Suddenly, one of the younger managers, usually reticent, spoke up. "Brianna is right. I've seen this happen. I've seen good projects sidelined for reasons I couldn't explain, until now." Heads nodded. The momentum was shifting. Redwood's attempts to interject were drowned out by the collective acknowledgement of truth. I had catalyzed a chorus that could no longer be ignored. Redwood's face hardened, eyes narrowing. "You're undermining the leadership of this company in front of everyone," he hissed. His voice carried threat, but it lacked conviction. He realized he no longer had absolute control. I could see it in the micro-expressions, the subtle tightening around his eyes, the jawline clenching, the fingers tapping nervously on the polished table. I leaned closer to the screen, voice soft but powerful. "I'm not undermining leadership. I'm holding it accountable. And accountability isn't optional. Redwood, it's essential. Integrity doesn't come from titles or fear. It comes from actions. Today, we have the choice to act differently, to lead differently, to be better." The tension was palpable. Colleagues exchanged more glances, some discreetly checking emails I had sent ahead of the meeting to key media contacts and board members. The room was alive, charged, every breath waiting for the next move. Redwood's eyes darted around, trying to assess damage, find allies, or regain control, but it was too late. The tide had turned. I clicked to the final slide. A stark, undeniable summation. Data visualizations of mismanaged projects, favoritism, and budget manipulations. "This isn't personal," I concluded. "It's business, it's ethics, and it's the standard we owe to ourselves and to everyone who believes in this company." My gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on each colleague. The weight of solidarity, unspoken but potent, filled the space. Redwood's chair scraped back as he stood, attempting to reassert dominance. "Brianna, this is insubordination. You will." I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "No, Redwood, this is accountability. And yes, it's uncomfortable, but growth, reform, and respect rarely come comfortably." My voice didn't waver, not once, and the room, finally, erupted in quiet applause, affirmation, solidarity, acknowledgement, the first tangible signs that the internal battle had shifted irreversibly. Later, as I returned to my office, the adrenaline subsiding, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. This was the crescendo, the point where strategy, patience, and courage converged, but the war wasn't over. Redwood would retaliate, leverage connections, try to undermine me through subtle manipulations or public deflection. He was formidable, and the fight for justice in corporate corridors rarely followed a straight line. But for tonight, Brianna Carter had won a decisive victory. The narrative had shifted. The boardroom had witnessed the truth. The whispers of solidarity were growing into a chorus. And in that moment, looking out at the midtown skyline shimmering under the setting sun, I felt an undeniable sense of empowerment, a certainty that I could shape the course of this company. Not through fear, but through unyielding truth. My phone buzzed. Mariah's message. "You lit the fire. Now watch it roar." I smiled, a quiet, triumphant curve of my lips. The storm had come, and it had carried my name. The morning after the boardroom showdown felt almost surreal. Midtown was waking up as usual, horns blaring, pedestrians rushing, coffee shops brimming, but I moved through it differently. Every step felt lighter, as if the weight of unspoken truths had finally been acknowledged. The storm I had unleashed in the boardroom the day before had already rippled across the company. I could feel it in the energy of the office before even stepping inside. As I approached my desk, I noticed subtle changes. Colleagues who once avoided eye contact now offered small nods of respect. Emails that would have languished in inboxes were being answered promptly. Whispers of accountability were no longer behind closed doors, they were out in the open. Part of the company's rhythm. And somewhere deep down, I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my fight had sparked this shift. Redwood, predictably, had tried to retaliate. I received an email flagged urgent, laced with thinly veiled threats and attempts at intimidation. But by now, The fear he once wielded had lost its power. I read the message calmly, took a deep breath, and drafted a response not from panic, but from control. Every word precise, professional, unyielding. I wasn't just responding. I was asserting that the days of silent manipulation were over. Later that afternoon, the company's board convened for an emergency session. I was called to present again, not as a challenger, but as an architect of reform. The air was thick with anticipation. Redwood sat quietly at the end of the table, his usual swagger replaced with a careful, calculated caution. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath as I laid out the path forward. New policies for transparency, channels for reporting misconduct safely, and a clear message that leadership must be accountable. Every statement, every suggestion, was backed with evidence, logic, and a moral clarity that could not be ignored. By the time I finished, the room erupted, not in applause. Exactly, but in a powerful acknowledgement of change. Board members nodded, some even offering tentative smiles of support. Redwood's face was a mask, but I could see the storm inside him, a recognition that he had lost control. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about victory. It was about transformation, about proving that one person, when brave enough to speak truth to power, could alter the course of an entire organization. Walking back to my office, I paused at the window, looking out over the city skyline. The sun was dipping low, painting the glass towers in warm, amber light. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Fear had been replaced with courage. Silence had been replaced with voices. And the possibility of change, real, tangible change, was no longer an abstract idea. It was happening. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at Blackstone Dynamics shifted dramatically. Redwood was gradually removed from key decision-making positions. Policies I had advocated for were implemented. Colleagues who had once doubted the possibility of standing up now shared their stories, their voices blending into a chorus of resilience. I had ignited something bigger than myself, a movement within the company that could no longer be suppressed. Sitting at my desk one evening, reflecting on the journey, I felt a deep, unshakable pride, not because I had won, but because I had stayed true to myself, to my values, and to the people whose trust I had earned. The storm had passed, leaving clarity in its wake, and I knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, not just for me, but for everyone who would now dare to hold leadership accountable. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. Real change begins when we speak up, even when the world seems ready to silence us. Integrity shapes your legacy. How we navigate conflict and challenge defines the respect and trust we leave behind. Voices matter, especially the quiet ones. Empowering yourself inspires others to stand, creating a ripple effect stronger than any single effort. Resilience is transformative. Obstacles are inevitable, but persistence, patience, and strategic action turn them into opportunities for growth. Justice is collective, not solitary. True victories aren't only personal, they lift communities, challenge systems, and redefine standards. Like if you've ever had to fight for what's right. Raised fist, dark skin tone. Share to inspire someone who feels powerless. Let them know change is possible. Glowing star. Comment your story. Let's rise, learn, and heal together. Speech balloon.